We're right. Okay, we're back on live stream. Roger, if you can hear us. Great. Okay, thank you for that. And hopefully that brief adjournment, we've managed to tidy up E and F, although there's going to be a bit around a different way. So can we have the new resolutions? Can we put them up on the screen, or are we? No.
Oh, I'm not in the middle. No, sorry. No.
We'll just get those recommendations up so that we're clear. Okay. Okay.
Good morning. Just to talk you through the changes that we've just done up there. So we've added a new recommendation D. So supports engagement with the community on I, where the funding should take advantage of the better off funding, where the council should take advantage of the better off funding, and the projects initiatives to be selected from the shortlist of tranche 1 of the better off funding listed in recommendation B. And then a new E, approves a letter being written by the Office of the Mayor to the Department of Internal Affairs, specifically requesting that clause 4.3 CV be removed from the funding agreement included in Appendix 3 of this report. Does anyone have any questions on those changes? New recommendations?
Everyone happy with those? So we could move the new D and E together, I think, probably with everyone is happy with that. Can I have a mover? Mike moved and a seconder. Claire has moved, seconded, sorry. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Contrary? Graham's recorded against. Thank you. The motion's carried. Did we deal with the old D is now F, Jenny, or do we need a resolution for that now? Okay, so the original recommendation D, which has now become F. Andrew's moved and seconded. Susan's second. All those in favour? Contrary? So are you in favour or against? Okay. So the only vote against I've got is Graham. So I declare that carried as well. Okay, so thank you for that. That's item 8 concluded for the meantime. Item 9. Submission to select committee on the water services entity. Gary. Yes.
I just want some clarification. So I've made a personal submission on this. Should I? Is it still okay for me to participate in this? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Worship. So this is The purpose of this report is to consider a draft submission, and we've already lodged this with the Select Committee. And we've advised the Select Committee that we'll provide an update following this meeting. So just due to the time constraints of the consultative process. So should be a relatively straightforward one after the last one. No, I jest. Dawn, over to you.
Lovely, thank you. So yeah, further to that, as well, you will note that appended to the report and the agenda was the Communities for Local Democracy draft submission. A copy of their final submission wasn't available until late last week, but it was included in the Friday mail out. So you will have received a copy of their final submission. So it is proposed that that would be what is appended to the council submission that's after consideration today, and then sent through to the Select Committee, the Finance and Expenditure Committee. In preparing the submission, of what we did was take a note of previous discussions that we'd had here in the chamber in terms of the various other stages I guess we've gone through in terms of some of the reform conversations, and picked out items that I felt were of particular interest or had been raised previously as concerns or issues. But looking for your feedback today in terms of any amendments to that submission, so that we can get it into the Select Committee as soon as possible.
Thanks, Dawn. Any questions? Thanks, Dawn. Claire.
I just had some comments about the submission itself. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
So,
for it.
well, I thought it was really great and really supported. It was raised on. Sorry, I'm just giving a page number. It's item 9, which is page 131 of the agenda. It's about WSC hierarchies of obligations. And 9.2 says council recommends that a clear hierarchy is necessary to manage any contradictions or conflicts between these. And you might recall that I shared with the group that sort of best practice that for water services, it's called the Lisbon Charter. And one of the principles of that Lisbon Charter, which is 3.18, is provides the means and define the responsibilities for the resolution of any conflicts of interest between parties that may arise from, you know, any of these operations. And to me, if you could make reference to that, I'd appreciate it. I just got the impression that the people that are designing this reform had no idea about these best practice frameworks, which is really disappointing. And so there's going to be some big gaps, because I think that the community voice and the accountability kind of stuff, or the way that the concerns are around how I suppose new water services are going to be delivered in a timely manner, and what happens when there's conflicting priorities. This is one of the real big risks that's being identified by our communities. And if they'd given some time to how these conflicts would be resolved earlier on, you know, some of the angst, you know, the lack of support might actually have been dealt with much more constructively. That's all.
Thanks, Claire. Are there any other comments?
Yeah, I have a comment. I guess first I'd like to congratulate Dawn and Martin and your team on all of the specific comments. I think they're bang on, and they will go towards making a much better entity than, if they are listened to and acted upon, than would otherwise be the case. However, I can't support this submission. The general comments, I think we end up with drawing completely the wrong conclusion. So I've made a couple of notes here, so I better look at them, otherwise I'll get lost. So basic property rights are mentioned here, and to me, the ownership thing is a complete red herring. It's you know, as a water connected resident, I have no ownership interest in these assets. Yes, council owns them, and I suppose you could say residents have some control in that they can submit and complain and whatever. But my interest in these assets is, and the other thing is, council can upsell these assets. So I mean, that's one basic property right that already we don't have as an entity. The interest I have is what you could call the quiet enjoyment of the outputs, I suppose. Clean, fresh water with a decent pressure that's reliable. Wastewater taken away, dealt with, and the outputs into streams should be at least at the level that I wish the streams were in the first place. So, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, talking about who owns them, what the government has done with the shareholding thing, I think really covers that off pretty well. I'm happy with that. What I want is those services delivered at the most efficient and cost-effective manner. You know, resilient, quality, all the rest of it. So I would totally agree that the whole Three Waters thing has been a PR disaster from the government. How they've gone about it, you know, I think they simply expected councils to say, geez, what a great idea, where all go, you know. And of course, when that didn't happen, they've been backtracking and putting ridiculous ads on TV that I think that, you know, they almost convinced me that it was a bad idea. Yeah, so in the submission, we state that the bill will lead to poorer outcomes for communities. Well, I don't believe that to be the case. What I don't get is how we can expect to operate our Three Waters more effectively than a substantial corporation that is well governed and well run. And the one thing I will say about local government is that we have got pretty good at creating entities that are well governed and well run and provide really good outcomes for our communities. For instance, LGFA, they've saved councils literally tens of millions of dollars over the years that the organisation's been operating. Excuse me. Not so much Waikato. We haven't borrowed enough money to really gain from it, but we will in future years. A bit closer to home, Waikato Regional Airport, very well run business that's outside of the political machinations, should I say, that probably tend for it not to be so well run. Even through COVID, with flights decimated, through their commercial land development, they've been producing really good results. CoLab, formerly LAS, another thing, taken really outside politics and producing good results for the councils and therefore communities. Even closer to home, the Waipā Communities Trust running our swimming pools and doing a damn good job, and they aren't even paid, those guys and women, but they have a passion for the community and the skills, which is the real point to go with it. So I'm not saying that we haven't done well with our community, with our water services to this point. I think we can probably pat ourselves on the back quite well. We've got a good team doing a good job. But when you look around this table, who's genuinely got the skill sets required to run a waters business competently? And I would say none of us really. So what what the 6 iwi reps and the 6 people from the 22 councils' job is to appoint a skill-based board to then appoint a CEO and management team to run a really effective waters business. And I think that's what would happen. We can do that. We can create this organisation, and I think we should. So while the government's process about where they've gone has been appalling, the basic idea is not appalling. That's good. That's probably, I'll probably hit my 10 minutes anyway, but so I'll leave it there. But there was one little thing I wanted to add that I can't remember. It'll come back to me, no doubt. I'll catch up with you later. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. Look, some others may wish to comment, and look, I take on board the comments that you've made. You've held that position all the way through. To say that I totally disagree would be probably an understatement at the present time for the vast majority of it, because I just don't see that it's a proven model that is going to deliver what was claimed, and I don't believe that the faults have been accurately reflected out there in the community, and that there is a lot more common sense ways of resolving the issue rather than a 4-water entity model, which is the largest issue in terms of the scale. That if we get it wrong, there's going to be huge in terms of cost impacts to the community. So I suppose, yeah, differing in points of view. It's great that we can have that differing points of view, but I don't know if anyone else has got any comments, but we have debated this around the table. So look, absolutely support that. You're right to have that perspective, but my feeling hasn't changed at all. That this has been a poorly thought out reform that's been poorly delivered, and I agree with you that the advertising has been atrocious for this. A lot of the important issues have been lost in the debates over whether it's the iwi representatives. It starts to become a cultural argument rather than based on facts. But look, I think we've probably done it to death, and this is the position that we've come to as a council. Claire.
Thanks, and Andrew, you know, I do respect your view. You know, it is different to mine. I just like to say that with my business degree and models that people use, you know, to organise activities, you know, like water services, it's been well documented that water services aren't a technical system; they're a socio-technical system, which means that the people side of it is just as important as the engineering side. And so one of my concerns has been that the proposal is the engineering side of it, and the people side is being really minimised and really marginalised. And so that's why I do support the submission as it stands, and it's one of the reasons why I feel that fundamentally the model that's been used doesn't match reality, which has been demonstrated by a lot of research. So that's my position. But you know, I appreciate that you've got a different view. I'm happy for the submission to reflect differing views. It doesn't have to be absolute consensus. So if that would be possible, you know, we could look at doing that.
Thanks, Claire. I think it does have to reflect the majority view. Otherwise, we're not making a submission at all. It's just presenting a different view. So I think we are going to have to either support this or not, and I'll put the motion shortly. But Graham?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, I respect Andrew's point of view as well, but I think it's that big flash entity that we're all going to be worried about, never being able to get to the right people at the right time when we need them. And that'll be a challenge. You know, just cut this out of the paper in the weekend, 4 positions, chief executives of 4 water entities. As I said to someone, they're probably going to be on $1 million each. I don't know, but that's the start of it. The other thing that really worried me is clause 140 of the bill, where mana whenua are given additional power to declare a te mana o te wai. This is separate from the water entity. And if you're in a co-governance situation, surely that's not logical. Why would iwi get that additional power to hive off and do this, and this, and have people report back? I thought that the governance body would have done that collectively. I haven't been able to get an answer on that yet, but yeah, that's one of my concerns.
Yeah, Roger, and then I come to you, Lou. Roger?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jim. Yeah, well done on putting this submission together. Certainly support this submission. And I've always let it be known my views on the proposed Three Waters entities. But what I particularly like about this submission is that we actually wholeheartedly support the Communities for Local Democracy alternative model. So we're not just saying that we should scrap the Three Waters proposal. What we're saying is, here's an alternative that should be considered that will achieve many of the outcomes of a Three Waters environment, which is going to improve the delivery of services. So certainly, and I'm really pleased that we do emphasize that in 2 areas in our submission to support that alternative model. So I certainly support this proposal.
Thanks, Roger. Lou?
I'd like to speak in support of it, Your Worship. Just quickly, I think the inclusion of the community wellbeing, it's not actually anywhere in this document, and I see the inclusion of that. And what it says is it is reliable and affordable, and that is actually highlighted water. And that, I think, is a critical thing. I actually agree with Andrew on one thing, that running a corporate entity does work very well. Unfortunately, we are going to have that corporate entity actually being governed by having due consideration to quite a number of government directions, whether it be climate change, whether it be cultural, whatever. And all of that is actually detracts from you running a business as a corporation. So that's going to make it quite a complex issue. The second thing I'd like to raise is stormwater. And we are asking for stormwater to be removed from the Three Waters, so it's actually 2 waters. Now, I do agree with this, except do we as a council end up having to fund this? How are we going to actually operate this? I do realise with stormwater, we're dealing with land, swales and things like this, but there will be a cost. Somebody's got to maintain that land. Somebody's got to actually work with it. We're going to have staff that's operating it. So will we get some funding? We won't. Will we get funding from the entity? Where do we get this funding from? Or do we charge our ratepayers? Just a quick resume of that. Thank you.
Andrew, I'll give you the right.
Yeah, sorry, look, thanks. I know I probably have my say already, but I just wanted to respond to both Roger and Lou a little bit. You know, all entities operate within a regulatory environment. That's just a fact of life. So I think, you know, I get where the Communities for Local Democracy are coming from in terms of addressing those water systems that can't be run, you know, cost effectively, I suppose, that communities can't pay for. But it misses the whole point of the fact that a bigger entity can be more cost effective and efficient. And I hear where Claire's coming from, but a well-governed, well-run organisation will be customer focused and you know, respond to, you give them the eyeballs, but big corporations can do it if they're governed properly. And that's where, you know, I was saying before, we actually have experience in helping make that come about. So, yeah, I think I just have to say that Communities for Local Democracy, in my view, have missed the point.
Andrew?
I'll just add, what they really don't do is they don't believe that it's going to be more efficient. I get that. I just think that they're wrong.
Just at the risk of a Browns debate.
I'll cut this
family
back.
dispute,
Andrew, I just want to say there's too many tiers of administration. That is the critical point. There's too many tiers of administration for that to be effective.
Okay, thanks, Luke. Were there any other different comments? Mike?
Right. Yeah, wouldn't want to come to your Christmas party. Hey, just probably a question for Dawn, etc. on page 2, through the mayor. Yeah. Under key provisions in the bill, and this is just a clarification for myself, the third bullet point, page 96 of our main agenda. So protection against the loss of public ownership include provisions preventing an entity from using water service assets as security for any purpose. And it goes on a little bit. I just want to clarify that, isn't that second tranche of money actually basically against the entities? In other words, the entities kick off and they actually owe $1 billion+ from the get-go. Is that correct? And in which case, if that's correct, can you just give me a clarification around that part of that paragraph?
I'm not absolutely sure of the question, but certainly one of the benefits of the water services entity, as stated, is that they have balance sheet separation and ability to secure debt at better rates, given that balance sheet separation. So certainly they will take on debt, both from existing councils, but also, as you note, some of that other funding stream. In terms of the public ownership, it is seen that through the governance arrangements that public ownership is retained, and that divestment. So you recall that a working group was established, the governance and accountability arrangements, and the further protections around public ownership and inability of privatisation was one of the recommendations that flowed out of that report.
Okay, any other questions or comments? But we've got a recommendation there, A through to C, and I'm happy to present our submission to the Finance and Expenditure Committee along the lines of the submission. I'll try and keep it fairly brief because they'll be sick of hearing the same comments, I would say, for the 50,000th time, but yeah, I think it's important that we do make our collective views known. Okay, can I have a mover and seconder for
I'll move that way.
Councillor Gordon and Councillor St Pierre? All those in favour?
Aye.
Contrary? One. Are you contrary too, Marcus? Voice recorded against? Both? Yeah, Marcus and Andrew. Okay, with only those 2 against, I declare the motion carried. Sorry,
there was just one question, and that was whether the council wished to include Councillor St Pierre's suggestion around the dispute resolution issue,
which is covered by the Lisbon Charter. Yeah, that's all. In fact, it would be good if the Lisbon Charter was used as a framework to, guide the whole process. But
so the question is whether the council wishes staff to reference that charter in your submission.
That's comfortable with everyone? Yep. Okay, with that addition, we can confirm our original submission.
And through your wish, I'll share a copy of that final, what is actually submitted through the Friday mail out, so that you've all got a copy of that.
Thanks, Dawn. Okay, we're on to item 10 now, submission for the Waikato Regional Public Transport Plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. So Brian Hudson is here to talk to this. The submissions are due by the 29th of July. In addition to the submission, you're being asked to consider who should present that submission to the Waikato Regional Council. So Brian, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship and councillors. So I'll take just get it in front of me, but take the council report as read and just highlight the fact that the new passenger transport plan, or the draft plan, is very much in alignment with council's recent transportation strategy and our ideas that we put forward in the business case for improving passenger transport for Waipa District. And if we then go to this actual submission points, I'm happy to take any questions that councillors have about the submission points and to discuss those and any points that are raised from the draft plan itself.
Claire.
Thanks. Thanks, Brian. I mean, I'm really pleased with the way it's shaping up, and as you said, it aligns really well with the work that we're doing as well. I do have a couple of questions, though, and I'm sorry I didn't send them through earlier. Firstly, I've got question 3 of your report, which is question 15. Do you support the concept of council potentially offsetting unavoidable emissions? And you've got no, offsetting should be a last resort, and there should be better ways, so more work done before you get to the offsetting requirement. Yeah, so my understanding was that there is that hierarchy that they will try and avoid it first, but if the bottom line is that it can't be avoided, then they do think it's a good idea, you know, to do offsetting, which I support. Yeah, so I thought the way it's covered in the report, with, you know, their report, their plan, I was quite happy with. Like, have you got other ideas that perhaps they're not going to be, I suppose, as proactive in seeking ways to avoid emissions, and so they'll just use it as a default, kind of thing?
Yes, so looking in the plan, they said if there were emissions they couldn't avoid, then they might consider planting schemes or things like that to put money into planting. But I thought passenger transport by its nature is more a community effort to minimise emissions. And while, yes, say purchasing electric buses and things like that, they will have emissions in their manufacture and things like that. But as a transportation service being provided, if they were going to try and make it carbon negative and then pay extra to offset any emissions if they don't get it quite to zero or get into negative, it seemed to me that there were probably other transport activities which have higher emissions, and instead of lumping the cost of trying to get to negative emissions onto the passenger transport service, would it not be more sensible to put those emission offsets somewhere else in the transport system? It seemed to be potentially punishing one of the best options for transport and reducing emissions to try and potentially add another cost to it.
Yeah, oh, I can see your point. Like, do you want to put some words around that as part of it? Yeah, because I mean, I was worried to have that statement, no, offsetting isn't really what we want to see happening. So I can see where you're coming from. Yeah, yeah. And then over the page on point 7, which is question 20, what opportunities are you aware of for the council to partner with another transport organisation? So when we were at council, we were given, at the local government conference, we were given a challenge. Councils and other big corporates are likely to be the big fleet owners of EVs. And when they come to turn them over to renew them, whatever, the suggestion was made that they donate them or make them available to communities especially those communities that are never going to have private ownership of EVs, and sort of set up a scheme where they'd be shared within that community. And I thought that was a really good idea, actually. And it seemed to find favour with others in the audience. Obviously, more work needs to be done, but I just thought that might be an opportunity that the regional council could also look to support or facilitate in some way. Yeah, because generally you only get the benefits of EVs if you can actually afford the capital costs at the moment, and they're pretty high. Yeah. So I think those are the main things. I did note that on the question 9 or 22, what do you consider to be essential services? And you've got education, healthcare, leisure, and shopping. But I would have thought employment would have been one of those as well. And then over the page on 13, question 28, if you currently drive a car, what trips could you or your household regularly undertake on public transport? And I'd really like to add sports practice because that's a really big consumer of parents driving kids to sports practice and then getting them again. If it could be handled by public transport, and perhaps on the weekend too. I'm not saying it's not likely to be the actual game, because I guess parents would like to be there too and see their kids play. But I mean, that could also be by public transport too. Yeah, so I think that's quite a big source of emissions. Yeah, just my suggestions. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Claire. I see your hand up, Roger. I'll come to you in a minute. Just comments back, Brian, on Claire's suggestions. Is that getting into too much detail for this submission? Because we can probably think of lots of different ways we can save it. It's the principle that we should be looking at, I would think. But Brian, your comments.
Yes, you're right, Your Worship. It is the principle. I did overlook that employment one in question 9, so we'll make sure that gets added. Certainly, when you read through the document, there is obviously a lot more detail in there about the intentions. So, you know, working closely with Ministry of Education, that idea of ridership, where you're trying to get really frequent bus services on those high demand sort of routes, and that would, you know, certainly help you with your sports practices and things like that, because those high frequency services would run Saturday mornings and after school and things like that. When kids get out of school, they can't get their school bus, but they could get a regular bus home. Those sorts of things are all certainly well covered in the document.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Roger. Mute, Roger.
Sorry. You can hear me now?
Yep.
Good. Yeah, thanks, Brian. And I suppose I'm starting off by going to our response to question 11, where we say the plan is in line with Waipa District Council's bus service improvement plan. And I'm just wondering whether there's an opportunity for us to make more of a case for public transport, because our bus service improvement plan, as we all know, is just really considering over the next 6 years for the Hamilton, Cambridge, Hamilton, Te Awamutu direct service, and then in the last 3 years for the Cambridge to Te Awamutu service, without any reference to the introduction of local public transport. I just think as our towns are growing, then we're seeing more and more of a need for accessibility within our communities through the provision of public transport. And we haven't actually addressed that anywhere within this submission. Do you not think this is an opportunity that we should be taking to register that need for public transport?
Certainly, I can clarify the submission responses if necessary, but the key points of the draft passenger transport plan, yes, is those ridership on the key routes, which of course we want to work really, really well for the Te Amiru Hamilton, Cambridge Hamilton services. But then the draft plan also talks about coverage services. So it indicates in the maps, say, a link between Kawhia, Parongia, Te Amutu, Cambridge, so that they'd have a service linking daily. And it also talks about those coverage services within towns that might be provided by on-demand type services, which they're trialling and intending to continue to trial to work out the best method. And so those, certainly the plan as a whole covers exactly what you've stated, our desire to have community type bus services that work effectively. So the plan enables that, and our submission supports that ridership, but it also supports those coverage services which the plan is proposing.
Yeah, I can't actually see that in our submission where we specifically identify that as a coming pressing need, Brian. Can we put some words into that effect?
Yeah, it is in that response 1.1 there. The plan is in line with the bus service improvement plan. High capacity and frequency is required on high use routes, and coverage or on-demand services are required for dispersed areas. So I could extend that to talk about our smaller towns and also within our major towns.
Yeah, I think the kind of service that we're talking about really is more within the creating that accessibility within our towns that are now growing. So the outer suburbs are quite a distance from the centre.
So you can beef that up, Brian?
Yes.
Relatively simply.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Graham.
Brian, just going back on question 19, above that it says you think some improvements, additional stops on the railway line going up to Auckland and better connections. And then 6.1 electrification, well, it says in there's nothing happening on electrification for about 10 years, which is fine. One of the things I would like to have put on there was the upgrade of the railway track across the Waimarino swamp. Currently, that's at 20 kilometres an hour, very, very slow, and it wants serious amount. And I think it's important to actually get that in our submission for the Transport Committee to hear, so that it's there and it doesn't get lost. It's no fun jumping on a train and expecting to have a quickish service, and then you're clickety-clacking across the Waimarino swamp because it's not up to scratch. And of course, there was talk about a second line there because 28 trains traverse that every day, and it's quite a slow process. So just wondered if that could be added in there.
Yeah, I think that's a good detail to add in there. Yeah.
Thanks, Graham. Any other details anyone wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Look, this has only just come to me. It might well be in there already. If so, just tell me. But we took Te Huia up to Auckland and accessed the airport through that when we flew overseas. Would have been nice if there was a bus service to where Te Huia leaves from in Frankton, and there currently isn't.
Yeah, that's all. No, that's.
Okay. All right. So if there's no further discussion on that, we have recommendations A through to C, and we need someone to present the submission in C.
Your Worship, I had an email from the Deputy Mayor who's happy to present our case.
Is everyone happy with that? Okay.
Joe has some wording for the changes to B.
Okay. Okay, and can you just type in Deputy Mayor in C? So can everyone read that? Roger, can you see the amendments?
Yes, Your Worship, but I'm just question the need for the word smaller within our growing towns, I think, because I don't think, well, neither Cambridge nor TA are small within the context of the future-proof region.
Okay.
Happy with that as it is now.
Reno probably needs a capital W.
Through Your Honour, just a clarification, which of the options are we using, 1, 2 or 3? Is that going to be mentioned in that? There are 3 options that we've got. And I just wanted to know if we've got down here, option 1, option 2 and option 3, whether we've got the mayor, deputy mayor presenting it, but which option is they presenting it, number 3 or 2 or 1?
Yeah.
It should be in there.
Okay. And that's what will be confirmed when we pass this, if we pass this resolution. Okay. So can I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Lou Brown and Marcus Gower. All those in favour?
Aye.
Contrary? Carried. Item 11, an alternate for the Future Proof Committee. Gary, I think.
Thank you, Worship. This is relatively straightforward. So
Yeah.
as Worship the Mayor and Deputy Mayor Liz are on the Future Proof Implementation Committee, but from time to time we're finding that resources are stretched. And so the suggestion is that Councillor O'Regan is chair of the Strategic Planning and Policy Committee and has already stood in for us on a number of occasions as an appropriate appointee.
Thanks, Councillor Gower and Councillor Andrew Brown. And you're happy, Susan, with that? Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. All right, so I've had a mover and seconder. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Now we've just, I don't think, is it here? Okay. You ready to go? If he's drawn breath. Yeah. Yes, Stephen, how are you? And welcome. I hope you're not still air sick, or it was a reasonable flight once you once you got off the ground. So look,
wouldn't say you got on the plane.
Okay, well, a very warm welcome to you, and welcome to the community board representatives here as well. Gary, hand over to you.
Thank you, Worship. So Council will recall that once we had completed our representation review, it directed staff to review the way in which we're working with community boards and see if we could improve the efficacy of the way in which we work with the boards and the outputs there. So we were lucky enough to secure Stephen and equipped to undertake this review. He's worked with the boards, they've workshopped this, and we've got some recommendations with us today as well. We have Sir Milner and Mike Montgomery from Cambridge, and I think I saw Ange walk in.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
so you may wish to seek comments from those good folk once we've heard from Joe and Stephen.
And over to you, Joe.
Good morning. I think Gary has run through the main highlights that I was going to talk about. Just the fact that this report review has been some time in coming. You directed that it happened as part of the representation review last year. So we are really happy to have Dr. Stephen Finlay here and having undertaken the report for us. So I'm just really going to hand over to Stephen to run through the recommendations.
Kia ora tātou, ko Stephen Finlay tēnei. Nice to see you all again, fresh from the LGNZ conference, some of you. I would like to take the report as read to give space for community board members and chairs and those present to give a flavour of how the process landed for them. But I will just highlight the interconnected nature of the recommendations that you see on page 148, just to draw your attention to those. I'll just touch on them one by one. So council, this committee has a sense of the backstory briefly. Participative democracy is quite an important concept at the moment. The underpinning assumption is that communities engage in democracy. And many councils throughout Aotearoa are looking to reconfigure their relationship to community boards to increase the opportunities to demonstrate community connectedness. And that's a key theme throughout the report as a whole. The Future for Local Government work is expecting councils demonstrate their understanding of community need, and community boards are a present and available vehicle to demonstrate that. Throughout the process of the report, it became clear that every voice recognised opportunities for improvement. And in the context of improvement, there seemed to me to be an opportunity to reset the relationships and to demonstrate both to itself, to its community, and hopefully to broader national government conversations, central government conversations, that community boards can increase their relevance and functioning with an eye to the future. One of the key elements I think that came through from both community boards in our interactive sessions, and we had an interactive session with each board and then collectively with the boards together, was that each board was looking to increase its, let's say, effectiveness from the perspective of wanting to validate community need and then find a way to submit that community voice into council's process. And the advice from LGNZ is that councils, when they demonstrate and make space for community board input, that's a key driver of community boards' sense of their own value. And again, that's referenced throughout the report. If council creates space for community board input, it then becomes beholden on the community board themselves to make that space have value. And so the subsequent relationship is from the community board out to the community, for the community to feel like they are being listened to, that they're being attended to, and that their voices and the diversity of voices, including mana whenua and tangata whenua, are brought into these spaces so that there's cultural safety present, and that the relationships out to the diverse communities, both rural and urban, throughout the Waipa Rohe or district, have a chance to engage, specifically with the planning processes which are underway and the opportunities in these regional planning conversations to demonstrate validated need. That's the context for these 5 recommendations. Recommendation 1 is self-evident, but again, it's the state and relevance can increase with the following recommendations. Number 2, that council affirm its own relationship to community boards and delegate responsibility, resourcing and oversight to the appropriate committee and executive leadership team to set expectations of performance and resource support, primarily through, as Joe has outlined in the covering note, officer time, which will be the major resource required to improve efficiency and effectiveness. Recommendation 3 is the reciprocal obligation on community boards to themselves recommit and reaffirm their relationship to council and to council staff, and to keep working on their governance maturity with professional relationships. So community boards are unincorporated entities, but their councils are sponsors. And the legislation that mandates community boards or suggests is the same legislation that councils operate under. So it's the same piece of legislation. Number 4, council to renew delegations to a more narrowly defined community need. And here we saw real key themes from both boards about history and forward opportunities with regards to traffic flows, heavy traffic usage in Te Awamutu in its industrial area, and opportunities for Cambridge to pick up and progress and advocate for big ticket items such as the library, subject to better off funding and so forth. So we saw those as an opportunity to support a community board being more focused on their own community needs, as well as then begin to think about placemaking. And that's quite a broad term with a number of definitions sitting under it, but I refer to some of the planning processes as well as placemaking references in the report for how that will allow communities to have a say in the futures they're going to inherit. That's the key message. Communities need to have a say in the futures they're going to inherit. We would argue through the paper that communities are poorer off if they haven't got a say in the futures that are being made for them, not with them, but to them. They need to raise themselves as a consultee to an active partner in place shaping. And that really talks to recommendation 5, which is around communities re-engaging with community boards, re-engaging with their own communities. And this is a little bit of sleight of hand from Equip, if I may be so bold. One eye on the opportunities that sit inside the work programs, communicating what those opportunities are to the communities. And the second eye, in a nicely connected fashion, bringing forth community need and hopefully finding the places where these align. And that shouldn't be too hard, because if community boards are connected to their networks, community need normally is not an instant thing. It has some continuity and longevity. So I would submit to council and to this committee that those recommendations, as per Joe's recommendation, be taken as a whole, because they indicate connected parts of a whole system that I've indicated there in the engagement map, that if you were to take one away, the legs of the stool, albeit a 5-legged stool, would be weaker. So we would submit that you take the recommendations as a whole, and that would be my summary. Potentially back to Joe and over to community board members if they felt they wanted to contribute.
Yes, or any questions? And
sure,
yeah.
Questions and comments for me first?
Yeah, look, I'll open the floor to questions and comments from the board as well, if they wish. Just one question from me, and look, I support the recommendations. I think if we're going to have community boards, we've got to, well, from both sides of the story, we've got to make them work. Yeah, I was going to suggest if they speak, they need to come up to a microphone. The question I have, though, if we're looking at a review, as we are obviously here, was there any consideration done, because the board at the moment, historic, I suppose, 1989, the boards were formed. Was there any discussion about whether they're in fact the right groupings, or for argument's sake, we've got a Prongi Award Committee. Is there some argument here that maybe there's an argument for additional boards, or is it just because it's historical, we stick with Te Awamutu and Cambridge? Was there any discussion there?
Not as part of this review, because in terms of the recommendation that you passed, we did the representation review and you decided to keep the community boards. And then out of that, the recommendation that you passed was to undertake a review to improve the role and functions of community boards. So when we went out and instructed Equip, those were some of the limitations that we put on the work that they were doing, because that was kind of reflected the direction that we had been given from around the table.
Yeah, but in effect, the principles would apply whatever the geographic areas were determined.
Just to add to that, Mayor Jim, we did think about how to connect to, let's say, the rural communities. And we felt that there's a dual role here. There's a role for the boards and their rural representatives on each board to build those rural networks, as well as have the council with the planning functions sitting at the committee to be able to connect to those rural communities as well. So we wanted to see an increase in connectedness to those rural communities as a whole, with each community board with resourcing from officers to be able to reach out to those rural networks also. Parongia seemed to me to be comfortable with its own, let's say, status. I did discuss with officers and staff the opportunity for raising Parongia to a full community board at that point, and given the constraints of the report, it seemed to me colloquially to let's get these community boards working first. And then as we improve these current boards, there may be opportunity later on, but that wasn't the immediate need.
Certainly in terms of some of the, the improvements and practices that come out for the community boards, there'll be, no reason why we can't look at how they flow into the Parongia Ward Committee. It was just, that in terms of kind of the Parongia Ward Committee, when we'd had that representation review, it was quite kind of clear around the table and from those people that submitted that they really liked the way that was set up, when we could just appoint people from those smaller communities, and it did a really good job of connecting those smaller communities at the ward committee level, which is why it was quite a deliberate decision to lead the Parongia Ward Committee as a ward committee with that ability to set it up like that, rather than having a community board where you'd lose that kind of connection between those smaller communities in that area.
Thanks, Joe. Questions or comments? Philip.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, Stephen, for your report. I had 3 terms on the community board, and all 5 recommendations I support, but the one that really stands out to me is number 5, and the community involvement. And it's critical that, and from my experience, it's critical that the community boards and members get individually involved in the community. And if you do that, then you can have some real success in there. So all the other recommendations are great, but the community involvement is that.
No.
And yeah, if you do that, you have real success and build up a really good, strong relationship with your community. So it's not just a statement, really.
No, I appreciate that, and thank you. I affirm and support your observations. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's those community boards and those representatives that are on council reporting back to council too. That's another critical thing too. And I'm not sure if to be honest, I'm not sure if we're not getting that. When with our at council meetings, when we do our roundups, that's something that could be introduced, but that comes down to the individual as well, though. Is reporting back, like today with our roundup of council representation, reporting back to council. So there's communication and engagement going on as well, and buy-in from everybody.
Thank you. I'll make one additional statement. Whanganui, as a case study, has elevated community board input to have voting rights around the council table. There are other cases where community boards input are more strongly affirmed at the council level. So those cases are referenced.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting comments, and just from a legal perspective, that's okay in terms of voting rights. Councils can't just give voting rights.
Sorry, I think it's speaking rights, not voting rights.
Yeah. Okay.
I need to reference my own report.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, so yeah, Graham.
Sorry, we've got the voting rights in the sense that we've got council representation sitting on the community boards that fully elected councillors like
Yeah.
Graham and a past member was.
Graham.
Yeah, Stephen, I just wanted to flesh out a little bit about the connection with the rural.
Sure.
Where are you coming from with that? Because 24 years ago, I got onto the community board and I immediately set up the rural group where the board went out to the rural people. It's proved extremely successful. And I think the Te Amuru board has picked up and have done that. And it's because we found on the board that the rural people at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night weren't coming in. They'd had a big day. So in the community halls, and we've got that down to a fine art, it's been very successful. And I think it's probably something that some of the other community boards could pick up as a suggestion as well. Yeah.
Again, from the observation, there was no, let's say, burning platform for radically changing the connection to the rural, but the report would be remiss if it didn't touch on those relationships.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Could I invite the chairs, Sue and Ange, to come up? There's a spare table here for a question and one at the other end. Not separating you for any other reason than it's the availability of a microphone. But look, I just invite both of you to make some comments if you wish. Sue, just need to switch on if you're going to lead off. Yeah, just you're away,
Okay.
Sue. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. We, as a community board, have prided ourselves, I think, on being very much a part of our community. We've looked at, we encourage people to come to our forums at the beginning of meetings. We do a lot of activities in the town. We're setting up things all the time. We've got community gardens set up this year. It's just, and I think it's a continual process. We've got really good members who actually are part of the community. They're part of different community groups. They report back to us at each meeting about what's going on in those groups that they've been looking at. So we're getting a fair idea of what's happening in the community. And we do have a group that are always looking at ways that we can do our best for the community. And communication is very important. We do try to keep in touch with the community as well so they know what's happening.
Thanks, Sue, for those comments. Ange, have you?
Yeah, so first off, from me, I'd like to say a big thank you to Stephen for the work he's done, for listening to us and managing to capture all of that and put it into a document that I'm very, very excited to hopefully support. I mean, obviously it's around elections, so I've got to get elected in again, but you know, with a stroke of luck, be there to support something like this if you all do support it. I'd also like to say thank you to each and every one of our councillors for making this possible, for listening to us when we came to the representation review and saying, hey, look, we hear you. We hear that you're frustrated and you're struggling. And yes, our community boards weren't working as well as they could have. And so, you know, as the chairperson, I acknowledge that. But most importantly, thank you so much for making this possible, for getting Stephen in and giving us this opportunity to reflect and redesign and have another crack at this, and hopefully to be able to do a much better job and be able to assist you guys to do your job. That we can be the eyes and ears in our community and try and, you know, massage out more information from them. So yeah, huge thank you. I just wanted to chuck in a comment around potentially making Pirongia ward a community board at some point. Don't worry, Claire, it's not bad. It's just we probably want to be mindful that we have a couple of other subdivisions that are rather large, like Leamington and Kihikihi in particular are very parochial about their own space. So I think if you made Pirongia a community board, you might need to be looking at making more areas like Kihikihi and Leamington community boards as well. So it was just the thought I had. But
yeah, I think they're working well like they are at the moment. And yeah, I'd just like to finish off that I am really excited about seeing this go through and having the opportunity to really do our work at grassroots level and feed it up. So thank you very much.
Thanks,
and for
Ange.
the opportunity to say something.
No, there's no problem. Okay, oh, Sue, yeah.
The magic list I've written out of all the things that the community board does. Things that the community board does do in Cambridge. We organise with the RSA the Anzac services. We organise Christmas decorations in the town. We actually get out there physically and do them. And we've organised the lights on the Christmas tree. We've got representatives on the social service committee of the town. And that also comes into the Christmas chair project that runs into the town. We've got representatives on the tree trust and then the museum committee. And we've got a community gardens project, which I mentioned before. And as well as, and we've got the rural hall tours, which has been mentioned. And we also have sister city committees, which link us with our sister cities overseas. So these are just the little extras that the community board is doing and that involve the whole community. For example, we're looking at, we always have a celebration of some sort for the liberation of our sister city in Niconoa each year. So there's things happening all the time with our board members, making sure that we are connected.
Thanks, Sue. This wasn't anywhere near an idea to stop those services that you're already providing. It's building on that community involvement rather than taking anything away. So, Mike.
Yeah, through your worship. But just a comment for myself is what I like about this, Stephen, is a much more strategic focus for the community boards. There's obviously a lot more, there's clearly more accountability in this also, which is something that is quite, obvious within these documents, these reporting systems and things. Yeah, so in terms of a Leamington thing, we see Cambridge as Cambridge, just to be fair. Cambridge as a whole, yeah. So apart from Battle of the Bridge Day, then there's definitely two towns. Yeah, looking forward to seeing the community board. I think it's an exciting position. I think it's the most exciting elected position to actually be standing for at these next elections. If people know about this, and I'll pick up Gary's comment or a comment that just came out through an email about, the people that stand at these next elections, they really need to look into what council, but we're talking about here community board, what community board, the involvement it's actually going to take to make this really successful. And as I talked last time, going from good to great. So I think communicating this out in some way that it's not what it was, it's looking forward. And when you stand for this, I can see more work, more accountability, but more strategic direction and investment from community boards to be linked with really the direction of Waipa through those two boards. So pretty exciting position to stand for. Yeah, particularly chairing these things. It's going to be really important, like I said before, an organisation can really be no better than its leadership. And I think, moving forward, these community boards, it's just exciting places to be for the next 3 years.
Thanks, Mike. Is everyone comfortable? Can I have a mover and seconder for the recommendations then? Philip and seconded Lou. No further discussion. All those in favour? Contrary? Oh, sorry. Did I miss someone? No. Yeah. Okay. Carried. Thanks, Stephen, for coming up. Safe landings on the way back. Hopefully the wind dropped. But yes, thank you for making the effort to come up. I know it was tricky. Thank you very much. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Ange. Thanks, Sue. Okay. Item 13, amendments to the infrastructure strategy. Gary.
Thanks, Your Worship. So thanks to Councillor Roger for drawing an omission in our long-term plan, particularly the infrastructure strategy, to our attention. That was an omission made in error And so we have a resolution before you looking to correct that error. There's no change to the plan that we consulted on or the decisions we made or the funding arrangements as a result of this recommendation. But look, Kirsty and I are here to answer questions, but it's effectively an administrative error that has required correction.
Thanks. Moved Councillor Webber, seconded Councillor Andrew Brown. But quickly, is there any questions on that? Oh, sorry, Roger. Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jim. Yeah, thank you for popping these back in. I think it's really essential that they were in there. Kirsty, I did actually send you an email. I'm not too sure whether you received it, but of those reinserted projects, if you just look, a lot of the funding schedules actually refer to historic periods, which maybe they need to be reassessed. For instance, if we just take the repurposing revoked state highways, and I'm just choosing that as an example, we've got the anticipated project dates 2018 to 2021 is 4.4 million. Well, either that has been committed and is gone and should no longer be in the schedule, or it's been put forward to occur in later years within the strategy. So I'm just concerned that the datal scheduling within those projects is actually out of date and needs to be updated to reflect what is currently the case.
Through you, Your Worship, Roger, just in response to your advice that you sent me an email, unfortunately, I didn't receive that from you. With regard to the point that you raised regarding the information contained relating to the transport projects, this was the information that was consulted on with the public as part of the development of the long-term plan. So what we're recommending to elected members is that it was an oversight that these were omitted from the infrastructure strategy before being presented to Strategic Planning and Policy Committee and Council ultimately for approval in 2021. We're seeking to rely on Section 46 of the Legislation Act to reinsert them as they were consulted on. And on that basis, we are confident that nobody is unfairly prejudiced by that. With regard to the infrastructure strategy itself, it is a high-level document. We accept that there is some information here that may be updated, and that is certainly a process that happens through the development of a long-term plan, through the development of the infrastructure strategy. We receive feedback from Audit New Zealand. We also look at readability and accuracy. These dates are indicative, and there is also obviously alignment with regard to funding for inclusion in the long-term plan. What we're able to say as staff is that there are no funding or timing implications as a result of reinserting these projects into the infrastructure strategy as they are. We are soon kicking off the development of the 2024-34 long-term plan. That will involve a substantive review of the infrastructure strategy. We have made you aware of that, I believe, when we concluded the last long-term plan and reviewed the infrastructure strategy. So that process is kicking off shortly. Sorry, I just thought that perhaps Ken or Gary may be wanting to add to that.
Kirsty,
Thanks, Kirsty.
Sorry, I think the comment that you made that you are reinserting these projects as they were consulted on, that's very valid. So I accept that, that's what we're doing at this stage, is just putting them back in. But I suppose I'm signaling that we do need to go at some stage when we review that strategy of updating those scheduled date funding allocations. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that answer. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Roger. I think that's really important that we don't alter the the context. Yeah, so we're doing this as you say, an administrative error. So we need to make sure that we don't change it at all. So thanks for those comments, Kirsty, and that's Roger. You're happy with that. So I've got a mover and seconder. So if there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you for that. So next item, easement to protect the sewer line.
Thank you, Bishop. So John Miles is online. He's a little.
He looks like death.
He's a little under the weather today.
Thanks. Yeah.
So.
Come to Christchurch to get COVID. So. Yeah.
John, we'll try and put you out of your misery as quickly as we can. But
can you hear me?
Over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Fine.
Because it wasn't working last time. This just relates to an easement that the sewer pipe ran under the house. They had an issue with it. It was broken, so we've relocated it to the boundary. And in order to do that, they're going to grant us an easement to protect the works. Pretty straightforward and pretty simple, really.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Were there any questions? It seems logical. Moved Andrew and seconded Philip. All those in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you for that. And item 15.
This relates to the removal of a segregation strip at Titanium Park. Allows us to sort out the legalisation of the road. And then there's a piece of road that's between unformed road between Vizzy and Waikato Tainui to the north. State Highway, the road goes out to State Highway 3. Waka Kotahi won't allow that road to ever be built. So, so it's to sort out the legalisation of Ingham Road and then to look at closing that portion of road between Ingham Road and State Highway 3.
Thanks, John. So we've got the recommendations there, A through to E. Councillor Thomas and Graham, Councillor Webber. Was there any questions? It's just one of those things we've got to tidy up. And access onto state highways not ever easy. Okay, I've got a mover and second. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Aye. Contrary? Carried. Okay, resolution to exclude the public. Can I have mover Andrew and Claire? All those in favour?